G'day folks, I just wanted to do a little video about a couple of problems with weak bash plates. Now there's a perception that weak bash plates are better for your mounts, that they won't rip your mounts off. Now if you've got like a plastic splash guard, yes, that will probably break before the mount breaks. So it is true for that. That happened to my Pajero. It happens to other vehicles. You know, the plastic splash guards, they break off, and you still got the mounts. But as soon as you go to, say, let's say a 3mm thick steel bash plate, that's probably strong enough to rip the mount off if you've got weak mounts. So then it becomes a question of how does it perform? So how does the bash plate perform? Now, I'm just you're looking at my hand here because my hand is a representative bash plate, and so at the moment, if we take it as being there's the back end of the bash plate, and here's the front edge. So that's how long my bash plate is. Okay. Now, if you have a strong bash plate, it will stay like that. If you have a weaker bash plate, when a rock comes up, or anything basically that applies an upward force, it could just be the ground, could be heavy mud, whatever it is, it will deflect the bash plate upwards. Okay, so that's just a deflected bash plate. Now look at this, the bash plate is now effectively shorter. Okay, so now you can imagine what it's done to these mounts. It's tried to rip the mounts off, basically. The act of it bending, pulling on the mounts, trying to rip them off, and something's got to give. And if the bash plate's strong enough to rip the mounts off, that's what it's going to do. So if it was rigid, if it had a fold here, for example, or if it had beams through it and it didn't bend, well, it's not going to apply that same pulling load. So that's one problem. Now the other one is the angle of incidence. So if we imagine that this is a rock or a log or whatever, and if you keep a nice flat bash plate, the resistance is along the plane. So it's just friction, pure friction as such, along the plane of the bash plate. And if your bash plate is, say, tied into a cross member back here, that load will be fed back into the cross member. So the load on the mounts will actually be not that high, not that radical, or at least hopefully within what they can handle. Now, if you have a bash plate that's going to start bending, what's going to happen now is what's called the angle of incidence. It's now going to start to flex over. Unfortunately, my thumb kind of gets in the way, but as we all know from experience, if you want to push a table, bend your palm over, and you've got a better chance of pushing the table because you've got a lot more friction. So the fact of this now forming a curve shape means that the friction against the table, the table's trying to push into my hand, into the bash plate, and basically rip the bash plate off. So the act of that friction increasing accelerates the amount the bash plate will flex over, and accelerates the amount that the bash plate will try and rip the mounts off. So the forces here are becoming much higher. You've literally got to lift the vehicle up to get it over the obstacle. And that applies a lot more friction. Whereas if you have a nice, stiff, strong bash plate, it'll just keep it in that horizontal plane and it will just ride over it. Anyway, I'm interested to hear your comments and any other thoughts. Ciao.